Hey everyone, welcome back. I think I am going to make a habit that every Saturday is going to be based on something with Dungeons and Dragons. I love this game too much for me to just leave it out of the streaming side of my life, so I'm adding it in. Hopefully you guys appreciate it. If you guys don't, just feel free to interrupt, anything like that. Whew. Anyways, um, so today I have two ideas that I'm bringing up, and we'll start with the first one, I guess. So let's bring up the adventuring day. So a lot of people have probably brought this up. I doubt I am the first one to address this. That, according to the Dungeon Master's Guide, the way they expected this game to be played, they expect you to do 6 to 8 medium or hard encounters in a day. If you've played this game, you don't get that many encounters in a day. I think the max I got from someone who would play a lot, who would like force a lot of encounters, was like 4. So this isn't how the game is played. Usually, is basically what I'm trying to get at. That the game was designed around this because this is what was initially thought, and then this isn't how the game was actually played. So I made some notes over here, and I'm basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through every class, and I'm going to go through how being Ron here has affected each class. Because obviously when you're getting 6 to 8 encounters expected, and then the end result is you get like 1 to 2 encounters instead, that's going to change how classes play. And in fact, the first one we're going to talk about is the most immediate effect. So, well, let's just start working on it. So here's the basic setup for what I'm doing. I'm going to do a day given what they expected. So there's 6 fights. I'm going to just say that the third one, surprisingly, was harder than expected. And of course, the last one was meant to be hard. It should also be noted, they say that there should be 2 short rests per day. Basically, 1 1/3 through the day and 1 2/3 through the day. We are playing this comparing that the short rests are going to happen between every 2 fights. And then we're going to do the setup that I'm used to. The setup that a lot of people just do naturally. First fight is what they would consider a hard fight. We take a short rest after that, and then later we have a second fight, which is a very hard fight. Very hard, as in deadly, or whatever. But that's basically the setup for what I'm going to do. A few assumptions. So we're going to assume everyone's at 3rd level. This is when people start picking up on resources. They could have more, they could have less. We're going to assume that there's at least 3rd level resources. I probably could have done this for like 5th level, for 9th level. It really does change at different level points. I just want to start at the beginning and work my way down, because they have noted that at higher levels, they don't expect everyone to get there. So the power output is not something I'm prepared for. 3rd level was when the game really starts. I'm going to assume there's no archetype resources, because that is always a big change. Like, for example, if you're a battle master, I'm not going to map out exactly when you use your maneuver dice. And there's one assumption here that I didn't add, but I am assuming all resources are spent on combat, which, when we get to spells, is a mistake. Definitely not all spells are used on combat. But we are comparing as if they were. We can just say, let's say they were 5th level, and then the other spell slots were used for roleplay, for getting out of the other 2 combats. For the sake of argument, at the very least. But anyways, let's just start going through, and let's talk about how this affects each class. So the most impactful has to be the Barbarian. So the Barbarian, at 3rd level, has 3 rages. That's their only resource. So let's imagine this first fight, they don't use any resource. Second fight, they rage. Then they take their short rest. They might need a hit die to recover their health, because they're always a frontline fighter. Then the third fight, surprisingly hard, they rage. They have to rage again. So then they have 1 last rage, and they know that the final fight's coming up. So they spend 2 hit die here, allow themselves to take damage, keep themselves as healthy as they can. And then the final fight, they use their 3rd rage. So very much it's, you're not in rage sometimes, you're in rage half other times. If you're not at the final level, I think until 20th level, you only have like 5 to 6 rages. So then we come over to how we play it, which is fight 1, they rage, and they keep themselves in rage. Short rest, they spend all the hit dice they need to recover. Then the very hard fight comes in. They rage. And then, hey, if they fall out of rage, they rage again. So, basically the thing is, usually you're supposed to pick and choose when you rage, and now you just rage every single turn. You start each combat by entering rage, and you end each combat by and every combat you enter rage. There's no real consideration of, is this the fight where I use my rage? Because you're going to have more rages than the DM has fights. And that really changes how the Barbarian works. One of the weird things with the Barbarian is if you don't have rage active, you don't have a lot of your archetype features active. So they're kind of dependent on their rage. Like, a Barbarian without rage is basically just a bad fighter. They're a fighter without the duelist fighting style. Without a fighting style, they have to go up close. They can't get heavy armor. Like, Barbarians without rage are just bad fighters. But with rage, they're the best fighters. They have all these damage resistances. They have all the additional damage output. If you're trying to be... They have this way to get advantage on their attack rolls, and oh, they get hit some more? Well, I have resistance. It doesn't even really matter. It averages out to the same damage taken from me, assuming the fighter's even blocking the hits in the first place. So, Barbarian is a lot stronger because we changed it to a system where you can rage every combat. Basically, they either have this surge or they're weak. Surge, they're weak. Honestly, that's pretty poor design. I kind of feel like the Barbarian can be redesigned to be a more consistent class, but for now we keep it as is. But yeah, as is, the raging Barbarian was affected a lot. You'll notice Barbarians are probably one of the more powerful combatants in your party. It's because they're allowed to rage all the time. That's why they're the most powerful combatant in your party, probably. No, I mean, that's fun. I'm not going to deny that's fun. Just thought you should know that's what's going on. Alright, so then we get to Bard, and we get to the first spellcaster, which, as I said, we are assuming every spell is used for combat, which changes this math a little bit. So first fight, you have... So this is what I'm doing for spell level 1, spell level 2. So you'll notice that in every single fight, they can cast a spell. In the hard fights, they'll use a second level spell, and then they also have their inspiration that they could trigger as well. Inspiration, you'll notice I'm switching it, I'm kind of putting it in the same pace as the rages. That basically, you have all of these options that you're working through. You have all these, basically the Bard has a ton of resources, but they're all limited resources. And even so, you can still spend one resource per fight, which is pretty cool, but one of my big issues with the Bard is that there's no consistent... Gosh, I gotta just make another video about my issues with each class. But, yeah, basically, they have no consistent attack strategy. Until we got Mind Sliver in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Bards don't really have those sort of effects. They have Vicious Mockery, and they have a single attack. Some archetypes fix that. Bard of Valor and Swords gives you the extra attack so you can rely on your combats. The College of Lore gives you Magic or Mystic Arcanum, so you can actually... Or Magical Secrets, my apologies. But yeah, they give you the ability to grab a cantrip from a different class and treat it as a Bard cantrip, which allows you to have a consistent damage like a Firebolt or an Eldritch Blast, more likely. And when you're fighting with only 2 fights, you could spend 3 spells and an inspiration each fight, and then on the very hard one, spend an additional inspiration. You have a lot of resources. Basically, here's the thing. Because you have so many resources, when you only have 2 fights, you could just basically blow through your resources as fast as possible. In fact, one of the things you're going to notice as we go into here, that's every fight, because there are less fights, there are less rounds of combat, and because there are less rounds of combat, spellcasters aren't actually able to spend their resources fast enough. Which is a weird issue to have, where if you're supposed to be more powerful but limited, and your issue is you can never reach your bottom of your limit, it's like playing a RPG like Final Fantasy, and you have 100 Phoenix Downs and 100 elixirs and stuff. Like, technically your mana is limited, but because of all these resources, you're not limited. You're not limited. Let's be honest. I'm gonna let my dog out real fast, and I'll be back. Just a sec. Go on, doggo. Get your rest. Alright. So, basically, I will also note one of the interesting things is because you only get 1 spell, you'd think that the best spells are concentration spells, since they last more of the encounter. And concentration spells are already often the stronger spells. Which, interesting that they want them to be even stronger, basically. So, yeah, the thing is, they expect you to just pick the one spell that's right for each encounter, but now you just grab the hardest hitting ones, the ones that you can just focus and blast them away with. Also, I notice, yeah, I made some lists in case you haven't noticed. Inspiration is thrown more freely with this second one, because you can throw it in every single fight. And that I actually think is a good thing. Inspiration is what defines the bard as a bard and not just some other caster. So, allowing it to more freely throw inspiration is a positive thing here. So, definitely, that is my opinion there. Kind of wish the bard had more inspiration-like powers and less magical powers, but hey, that's fine. It's fine. Just make the bard stronger, that's fine. Alright, so now we move into cleric. Whew. So, cleric has the same spell stuff, but now they have the channel divinity. And you're going to notice that they have to kind of... One of the things I added was that they spend a second level spell slot on the last short rest after that hard fight. The idea is they might have to cast, what's the spell called? Prayer of Healing. Maybe if you're using the old Healing Spirit, you can use that as well. But basically, there might be a spell slot that they have to use just to heal everyone up. Meaning they have to rely on only their channel divinity here. Now you get multiple spells and the channel whenever you want. Now you're going to know something because the channel is what pushes you over the edge, much like how the inspiration for the bard pushes them over the edge. The power of the channel then matters a lot. If you have a weak channel, obviously, you're going to have issues if you have... You're basically just limited to your spell slots. This is actually why they gave you Harness Divine Power, to basically recharge some of your spells. Because, I just gave the example, the nature domains charm animals and plants, which probably isn't going to work on half the encounters, versus the light domains Radiance of the Dawn, which just is an AoE fire damage spell. Like, one of these is a lot more useful in combat than the other. Now, again, we are preparing this as if every encounter is a combat encounter, as if every resource is spent for combat, which is probably flawed, but at the same time, this thing is designed as if you're getting 6 to 8 combat encounters. I'm not sure where else you spend your resources if you're fighting that often. So, we're just getting these examples taken care of where we can. Whew. Alright, Druid. So this is basically the same story as the Cleric. And I'm going to try to not talk... Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the spells. Maybe I'll bring it back up when we get to the Wizard. But they have the Wild Shape. So they can, like, scout once during the short rest. They get one during a fight. And then this one, they need to use Wild Shape here. Maybe another Wild Shape in this fight. Spend some hit dice to keep themselves healthy. And then spend a second level spell slot on a Wild Shape here. Like, just... It's the Wild Shape is the thing that makes them more than just a spellcaster. And in this fight, you know, you get multiple Wild Shapes if you want it. You get a Wild Shape during the short rest if you want it. You get... Yeah, basically Wild Shape is what is the difference. That's the thing that makes you more than just Suncaster. And that's the thing. If Wild Shape is just you turning into a bird or something, you can't really use that in combat. As a matter of fact, this is why the Moon Druid was so powerful in the early game. When you're still trying to figure out what spells are powerful, they just get turned into a monstrous thing each combat. You could technically, with this order, go, if you're a Moon Druid, go Wild Shape, rest. Wild Shape, rest. Wild Shape, Wild Shape. And then, like, you could save 1 second level spell slot for this fight, and then use your spell slots for short rest recoveries. Like, that's why it's so... That's because it has the most absurd potency for a Wild Shape. Like, absolutely broken potency for Wild Shape. And, it's why I think that they're moving down the path of, if you look at the Spore Druid or the Fire... or the Bonfire Druid, or whatever it's called, though new Druid archetypes have a new use for your Wild Shape feature. They have something where you summon a Flame Spirit. You become an aspect of death and you get temporary hit points and more poison damage. Stuff of that nature. And the reason they added that is because of this. Because Wild Shape is kind of the thing that makes you not just a spellcaster. Now, albeit, Druids can just be spellcasters, and these are some strong spells. They have stronger spells than clerics usually do. We can make a talk about each of the spellcaster's spells later, but generally speaking, they are much better at crowd control. They are much better at controlling the field. If you're having a lot of combats that are interesting, they can take that interesting stuff and use it to their advantage. They can spike growth to the ground. They can entangle. They can fairy fire enemies. They can do stuff like that. All right, fighter is pretty straightforward. Second one turn, action surge the other. Short rest. Then maybe they have to use action surge and second wind in a single fight, but generally speaking, these are their only two resources for most of the game. And yeah, then when you switch out, they just use second wind and action surge. And the reason that is kind of, they're more a passive. What I mean by passive is that all their features are things that aren't lost, that they aren't resources. It's just you have it. Because of that, they aren't too affected by the change in combat. If your fighters are... Okay, let me just say this. It's not... If your fighters are feeling a bit weak, that it might be because of this. Really, the statement is, if your spellcasters are feeling a bit strong, it's because of this. It's because your spellcaster can drop a fireball in every combat. Maybe multiple fireballs in our case. Like, that's really the issue, not the fighter. This actually kind of gives you a sense of where the fighter is expected to be, and therefore where other things are expected to be. Whether the fighter is like a consistent combat class, this is an example of where they expect things to be around, which is kind of an interesting theme. There's a better example in just a bit, but good idea to have this sense that wizards usually, like the spellcasters, they just have far more utility because they just spell slots were prepared assuming you were spending in resources for 3 times the events. Now we don't have that many events per day, and if your resources keep coming back, you're going to be more strong, more powerful. That's the thing. I find, like, I can enjoy a character without spellcasting, but if I know this campaign's going into higher and higher levels, I'm probably going to lean towards the side of playing spellcasters. Doesn't have to be a full caster, but something with spells. Something like Paladin, or like I've actually played a lot of tanks that were clerics because I just needed the extra spells. That's how I play, and given that most of my campaigns go like this, kind of necessary, unfortunately. Alright, monks. So, monks is basically, let's say they have 3 Kai points. So you might spend 1 Kai point this fight, 2 Kai points this one. Then, like, maybe this one you have to spend 2 Kai points here. Maybe you could spend up to 3 Kai points in a turn. And it's just 3 Kai points, 3 Kai points. Like, it's just straight out, you spend them all. Which has... It kind of just brings up the main issue of not enough Kai points more clearly. So, here's the thing. Everyone kind of notes that the issue with Monk is that they don't have enough fuel for their fire. Like, each Kai point, if you use it for Flurry of Blows, that's 1. That's 1 attack. That's it. They have 4 attacks. They have 3 attacks in a turn. That makes it up to 4. Or in this case, 2 attacks a turn. This makes up to 3. Which, don't get me wrong, that's more powerful. But in some fights, you get that once. You get that once. And if you want to do something else with it, if you want to disengage because you have to use Step of the Wind, if you want patient defense to try to be guard, like, you have to spend resources. Otherwise, they have a smaller hit dice than people that want to be in the front line, which, yes, they are in the front line, unless you're like, there's a Sun Soul, doesn't have to be in the front line. But other than that, you have to spend resources to stay in the front line. So you have a smaller hit dice, smaller health, and the way you have gain in and out is reliant on your Kai points. So if they run out, if you're doing poorly, you have those issues. Once you run out, you're a bad fighter, and they're gonna run out very quickly. Even like they run out quickly in this form. Like that's often feels like not enough. So they run out even quicker in this form. So I'm gonna let my dog out because so I have 2 dogs. They were both in here. I need to let the other one out because now this one's out. There you go, buddy. Going out. Have a nice day. Love you, doggo. All right. So this actually helps a lot more that they have 3 Kai points instead of 2. So this sort of fighting actually solves their resource issue a bit more, since they could spend their resources more freely. That being said, they're still a little low on Kai points. As you get in higher levels, you'll eventually start being able to spend resources. But the fact that this early on, you don't have too many Kai points is a real issue that the monk has to address. And one of the things is, I'm going to have to talk about Stunning Strike with that. So the reason they don't give the monk too many Kai points is they have this 5th level feature called Stunning Strike. I think most of you know about it. I'm going to pull it up just to prove it. Let's pull up the monk. Their 5th level feature. So, let's see, where's the... Here we are, 5th level, Stunning Strike. So, notes, so it triggers whenever you hit another creature, so you don't have, so it doesn't cost any actions. You just have to hit another creature with a melee whip attack. You spend 1 Kai point to attempt to stun them. It's a con save, or they're stunned, until the end of your next turn. Note, stunned, they fail strength and dexterity saves. All attacks have advantage, and they're incapacitated, which means they cannot take actions or reactions, which means they don't have a turn, basically. So this can completely... So Stunning Strike completely disables certain characters. Completely disables certain fights. And it costs 1 key point, but it costs Kai point resources. But it doesn't cost action resources. Which has this interesting issue. If you have Stunning Strike, you can't give them too many Kai points. You can't allow them, like, 3 Kai points here. If you're at 6 Kai points, you could spend 5 in a single turn and just make sure that boss cannot move. You just run up to the boss, you hit them 4 times, you just burn through their legendary saving throws, and then you stun them. Like, Stunning Strike has issues, is basically what I'm getting at. Ugh. Basically, because they're able to burn through their resources so quickly with Stunning Strike, they can't really give them more Kai points. Like, they could have, back when they had the fights list out like this, like, if you have 5 Kai points in 2 fights, and you want to spend 1 on a Stunning Strike, that is expensive. That is a resource that is costly. But when you're getting only 1 fight per short rest, and you know this is going to be the only fight before your next short rest, blow away. Like, if you think you can finish this fight in 3 rounds, which, yes, in this game, that is very much possible. If you want to do that, just remove an enemy from the fight before the fight begins. Sounds great. Sounds great. So, basically, my general theme, when they were doing, like, class rebalancing stuff, I would have loved if they gave an option to replace Stunning Strike with something that helps them regenerate Kai points between counters. Something that allows them, like, if you didn't spend a Kai point if you didn't spend a Kai point this turn, you gain 1 Kai point. Something so that they can ebb and flow and balance out their Kai points. Something so that when they're low, they can get back up. But they didn't make it, and so I can't really talk about it further, which is unfortunate. That is very unfortunate. Alright. Paladin. So, first of all, they only have 3 spells at this level. So, their Channel Divinity is kind of important. Much like the clerics, if they have a bad Channel Divinity, that becomes an issue. But I noted that because of their lay on hands, they actually have a lot of resources during short rests. When you're not in a fight, they can heal pretty darn well. Then they have those spells. On the spells, here I'm going to hit back on this with a Stunning Strike. The main issue with a Stunning Strike is it allows them to exhaust all their resources into these heavily condensed fights. When your fights are very short, when you're not having much combat, and you have a lot of combat resources, the importance is not the how much resources you have. Like, it's not about conserving resources, making sure you get the most bang for your buck. It's about being able to expend and use as many resources as you can. It's about just, like, throwing the bucket at them and getting the best thing. It's, if you have $10,000 for a car, but any money not spent on the car is just lost, then you're going to find a $10,000 car, you know? Like, maybe the $5,000 car is better, but this one is slightly better. It costs twice as much. Hey, I'm going to spend it all on that because, hey, I'm losing this money anyways. That's basically what it is with these things. So Paladin has another issue. So here you'll notice that spending more than a single spell in a turn, pretty unlikely. But then we get to these more concentrated fights. And this really not not using a 5th level paladin was a mistake here. Because at 5th level, they get basically double the spell slots, and they get 2nd level spell slots, and they could just burn through these spells. They have Smite. Smite allows them to just, on their turn, they can basically bonus action cast a spell, then they can action Smite, other action Smite. If we're talking about just blowing resources as fast as you can, they could spend 3 spells in a turn. 3 spells in a turn. No one expends their resources that fast. This is why if you're having issues with smiting paladins, it's because they have resources that they really have to pay out. Like, notice in Fight 1 and Fight 4, I didn't even have space to give them a resource used. They needed the spell level 1 in the channel in this fight, so they had nothing left over. They had 1 spell left, and just their Lay on Hands. They used the Lay on Hands here. Like, that's the thing. Paladins are built around just trying to maintain your resources properly. It's the same thing as the monk, but more maintained, because it's long rests, and so they gave them more, figured there'd be more short rests in a day. More fights in a day as well. So just the smite becomes insanely powerful, and therefore with more spells per fight, more chances to just blow foes away, more chances to just explode with immense damage. It's the same thing as the stunning strike issue. Stunning strike and divine smite, because they do not cost actions, and because you're having the issue of not spending your resources fast enough, they allow you to spend your resources fast enough. They allow you to just explode on enemies. And this is the issue with some combats. This is the issue with, as you get into later levels, if you allow players to just explode like that, if you do not have this design, it's an issue you're going to run into in your campaigns. Alright, so now we get into Ranger. And they basically don't have many resources, just this first level spell. And it's why Hunter's Mark is actually so important. We're just going to jump over to that. Because Hunter's Mark, you might cast your Hunter's Mark here, and then that Hunter's Mark still maintains into this fight. And then same here, you might cast the Hunter's Mark here, and that maintains into this fight. So Hunter's Mark was a super important spell to make the Ranger still viable. Help make sure it had some damage output, even as the Paladin was smiting fiends into oblivion. I think the Ranger, the Ranger is a lot like the Fighter, where a lot of its power is more passive. And I think they're doing a better job of showing that off for the Ranger as we move on with the new archetypes and stuff. But that's really important for this class. Basically that's all we really had to say. I think with the Paladin, it's kind of in the same spot as the Paladin. It has less resources to spend, but it's more passively potent. And I think this is also a bad example, because I think every Ranger archetype it's either more notably passively powerful, or more notably has an additional resource. Which, yes, I will consider the Beastmaster. The Beast's health pool and abilities are a resource. That is my opinion. You can tell me I'm wrong. And yeah, now that I think about every class is a passive effect. So Ranger is kind of like Fighter, but with long rests instead of short rests. Alright, Rogue. And this is the example. If your Rogue has no resources. If you play a Thief Rogue, the only resource is your 20th level ability. Let me go confirm that, but I think I've seen this often enough that I could say it's true. So classes, Rogue. If you look at their theme, expertise, all of these do not recharge. They all are passive. They're just always usable. Reliable talent, anytime you make an ability check. Most of the archetypes, blind sense, whenever you make ability, whenever you need to see. Slippery mind, just saving throws. Just all these things. Stroke of Luck is the only exception, and it recovers on short rests. So it's a one-time ability that's pretty insane, recovers on short rests. If you're not at 20th level, if you're an archetype that has no resources, which I think a lot of them are. Assassin has no resources, Inquisitive has a resource later with Steady Eye, I think, or Unerring Eye, was the modifier it uses. But I know for a fact the Thief has no resources. But basically, yeah. The Rogue, if you don't have Stroke of Luck, the Rogue has no resources to spend. Which, with no resources to spend, they're just kind of always passive. And so if you ever notice that as you're, and I could actually math this out for you, but I've done this once. A Gloomstalker Ranger with casting Hunter's Mark and being able to, of course, cast spells. A Gloomstalker Ranger can out DPS an assassin for quite a few levels. I think they out DPS them at 3rd level, and then as you keep going on, until I think it's 11th or 13th level that the rogue finally starts DPSing back in range. But and we're just talking about that first round. We're talking about that first round where the Gloomstalker Ranger just deals, even just with its more passive attacks, deals more damage than the Assassin Rogue. And, like, what was it? Your special... How do I explain it? The sneak attack damage for a high-level Rogue is, let's see, 15th level. You start having sneak attack damage equal to a Fireball. Of course, at 15th level, if your mage is just casting Fireball each round in these 2 combats a turn, then your mage is actually being a little... Could be doing more. Let me just put it that way. If they're just casting 3rd level Fireballs, the mage isn't doing enough. Which, that's the issue. That's why the rogue is hurt by these options. The fact is, the rogue is the example of the passive class. And do that is the passive DPS. It is not very tanky, it has to be protected, but it has the damage output when others are spending resources. Which means, if you're able to just consistently deal more damage than the rogue is just a skill monkey. The rogue becomes what it is outside of combat. Which, albeit, I'll play a rogue because of its out of combat abilities. Reliable talent is absolutely insane. But if your rogues ever feel lackluster compared to your wizards, it's because of this is how you do combat encounters. Because the main power of the rogue is to have, alright, fight number 1. I take out one of the enemies before it even begins, and then it begins, and with my extra damage, I start taking out another one. The fight barely even started, and it's already finished. Fight 3 was hard because I didn't get surprise round. Like, that's what the rogue does. Very useful class, but it becomes just a utility class when you're fighting like this. Because everything is passive, which means when you have more condensed fights, they can't do anything more than when they have diverse fights. Like, the rogue is best when you have 15 fights a day, or something like that. That's absurd. I don't expect anyone to do it. But if you just have boss rush style, just keep going, that's where the rogue fits in. Sorcerer. So Sorcerer is basically, like, it's... Sorcerer and Wizard, when we get to them, are just basically spellcasters, but Sorcerers have these sorcery points. And you start to realize that sorcery points are actually pretty rare. These changes to their spell slots actually don't occur too often in the early levels. Later level, when sorcerers have more sorcery points, more spell slots, they become more potent. And we actually see here how they can spend a ton of spells and sorcery points in a single fight. And, like, even turn sorcery points into more spells, or vice versa. The thing is, sorcerers kind of have the same issue as monks, where they're not... The thing that makes them themselves, makes them potent, doesn't appear in the early game, but then they have the problem of exploding in the late game. Unlike wizards, who only cast 1 spell a turn and all that stuff, they can also spend sorcery points. They can make spells more potent, they can heighten them, they can empower them, they can subtle cast them if that's necessary, get you in the surprise round. They could then turn their first level spell slots into more higher level spell slots, into more sorcery points for more damage burst. Sorcerers later become, in this system, very powerful. And in this system, like, the managing of sorcery points is really something you have to consider. This isn't the system we're in. Most people are not in this 6-fight system. Then, in addition, like, I still don't like how few sorcery points they have. Like, sorcery points, I wish that some of the spells, some of the effects, like Quicken Spell and Heighten Spell, some of the more powerful sorcery abilities, were, like, an advanced meta magic, and then we had a lesser meta magic that you could get at level 3, and to make up for it, you have more sorcery points at earlier levels. You're able to get them back on short rests. I would love if sorcerers had more resources, but to give them more resources, like it's just the fact some meta magic options, when you have sorcery points to spare, are more destructive than others. Twin spell, quicken spell, heighten spell. Those three. And yeah, we've been pulling up all these classes. Let's just pull up the... Oh, there's a back to top button. Why am I not touching that? I'm sure some people are annoyed. I apologize for that. But yeah, let's look at meta magic. Class features. We'll jump down to meta magic. Here we are. Alright, so careful spell. Avoid your allies. Perfectly fine, just helps you with more variety. Distant spell. Increases range. Again, more variety. Empowered spell. Now you reroll damage dice. Suddenly you can use the new rolls. This is pretty potent, but I think this could actually be fine as the lower levels. Extended spell. Oh, minute longer. More variety. Heightened spell. 3 sorcery points. They get disadvantage on their first saving throw. Basically, they're going to fail. You're going to deal the extended damage. That's too much. Two sorcery points. Gain as a bonus action, which means you have an action to cast more spells. Too much. Needs to be a higher level theme. Cell spell. More utility. Twin spell. You spend sorcery points equal to the spell's level, and it double casts it. Again, too powerful. So twinned, quickened, heightened, and maybe empowered need to be not options at 3rd level, and then you get them at higher levels, and in return you would get more sorcery points. That's what I would love to see for the sorcerer. Let's see. Then the optional, I think they even get more magic options. Seeking spell. So this one allows you to reroll an attack. I don't think... This one might, again, be the higher... Seeking and Transmuted, I don't have enough playstyle to tell you what they are, but... Basically, the idea of meta magic was to be more options, which means when the options are just more power, it becomes hard to use in a system where if they have too many sorcery points, it becomes too much. Oh well. So, yeah, basically the main issue is just, if they can explode all of their sorcery points, the sorcerer becomes an issue. If they can't, then the issue is they don't have enough sorcery points. Literally the exact same issue the monk has, the sorcerer has. It's just, the monk, it's more blatant because they have Stunning Strike as their 5th level feature, where if they have too many, they just explode and disintegrate certain encounters. And at the other times, they rely on sorcery points, or on Kai points, for their basic combat. So monks deal with the same problem as a sorcerer. Monk, it just hurts them a lot more. Alright, Warlock. So you're going to know something about each fight. Because there's 2 fights in a combat bout, they get a spell slot in every fight. They're actually kind of stronger. I think that's kind of cool. Then these fights, it just basically condenses them. They actually spend less resources because they can't recover them fast enough. I don't really have much to say. I'm sure a lot of people will talk about the fact that because this is how their spellcasting works, they kind of they are reliant on these short rests here. We can also talk about Eldritch Blast and how some warlocks don't even cast their spells often. There's a lot we can talk about. I don't really have much to say, unfortunately. The thing is, they can't burst. And, like, if they can't... I think this is really the end conclusion. If they can't burst, they don't become an issue in these shorter fights. They're still spellcasters. And again, the spellcasters, the issue of that you spend all your spell slots every fight becomes an issue. But, I mean, as long as they don't burst, they're not going to be... This isn't going to be much of an issue. Wizard, I think this is the last one. We're just kind of going through this just to make sure we do everything. But I feel like I'm running out of everything to talk about. Wizard has a special ability that they can spend 2 spells thanks to Arcane Recovery, so these hard fights, they can use more potency. I also noticed that in these longer ones, Arcane Recovery makes sense to recover your 1st level spells, where in these you just want to get the highest level spell you can, because obviously you want to burn them out as fast as you can, and between all your spell slots and your Arcane Recovery, you're not going to have enough time to burn out all your spell slots. But yeah, other than that, I do know all effects of spells are multiplied here, because wizards have the best spells. Wizards are built to have the best spells. So, Any spell that is all anything where a spellcaster is strong, they are the strongest in all those scenarios. If they have their options decided appropriately, we'll have to talk about that another time. But as long as you have all your options categorized out, wizards are able to do insane things every single turn, and then arcane recovery to make sure they can do it next time as well. Alright, then I just added the artificer. I didn't really have much to say. It's basically the same as the ranger. They're a half caster. Worth noting that their archetypes often make that first level spell slot a lot stronger. And also, like, if you're playing an artificer, it's more for their inventions and figuring that all out. But yeah, so end result. Any burst, I'm going to just use burst in quotes, is much stronger because there's less fights and more space to burst. And I think that's basically the conclusion. If your character has these bursty elements, if they have resources they have to consider that they no longer have to consider, again, the barbarian, they have to consider, do they rage? On these fights, they burst. Like, if you have a barbarian in your party, basically on fight 1, you have to compensate for the fact that your barbarian's a weaker fighter. On fight 2, the barbarian's in rage. You could probably not cast spells this fight and conserve it for later, because the raging barbarian's going to take care of this fight for most of you. Like, that. This is all about, like, a resource management. That's what makes it interesting. But if they can rage every single fight, barbarians got probably the best stick here. The only one better is paladins, but that's because they can burst 3 spells in a turn. Once you get to 5th level, I say monks also got all the advantages here. Though monks have more underlying issues with the Kai points, so you don't feel it as much for them. Actually, and that's actually kind of a funny thing that monks mechanically are actually hurt by this more, but people still think rangers are the worst class. But anyways, I'm not going to get into that now. I just want to talk about this for now. As for solutions, so the main solution is basically just to move into the system that was built for. To build into 6 fights. But you can't really... You can't just change your DMing style. If you DM in a way where you get that one big fight, and then the fight... You know, you get your big fight, they have a rest, and then they have another big fight, and then they have their long rest. You can't really do that. I like to do gritty... There's gritty realism rules, I think is what they're called in the DMG. So, with this, the idea is that short rests are 8 hours. So basically every long rest is now just a short rest. And then every long rest is a week. So, the thing is, not every campaign fits for this. Like, I can use this for, like, if we were from Adventure Guild, we take on a quest, we go 2 days out, 2 days back, then it's day 1, 2 fights, long rest, which is actually a short rest. Day 2, we have the actual fights, we do the job, then we have a long rest. And then on the way back, we have some fights, short rest, then we get back in the city, long rest. You can do it like that. Not every campaign is suited for this, is basically the issue with gritty realism. It does solve the problem, though, because suddenly this short rest is removed, and this is kind of a microcosm. We don't know how many... If you don't know how many days you're going to be gone, conserving resources becomes a big theme for spellcasters and stuff. I would suggest if your campaign if your campaign can support these rules, I would recommend it because it will allow you to make more. Basically, the problem with these encounters is that people could die a lot more easily, and people don't like their characters dying all the time. It also makes, as I said, bursting. It makes paladins exceptionally powerful, stuff like that. Spellcasters, we're playing a tier 3 campaign, and every fight starts with a 6th level damage dealing spell that just destroys half the fight. And then the rest of us get in. Anyways, when fights are like that, yeah. It has its own issues. Great. This solves that issue, But if your campaign doesn't support it, it creates too many other issues for me to recommend it. I would say just look into it, consider it. Another person used the example of instead of long rests are a week, long rests are only in towns / fortifications. So that basically you do your quest and then you get your long rest. Quest, then long rest. So if you want to get a long rest, you have to abandon the quest. This works. Like, basically, if you can fix around and make gritty realism work in your system, it brings it back into its expected output. And the issue with the sorcerer and the monk we can address later. But not everyone can do that. Not everyone could do that. There's also the issue that now you leave, you have a session, you leave, when you come back for your next session, you have to remember what resources you've already spent, because you only got a short rest between sessions, not a long rest. I don't know how to say this other than just, it depends on the campaign. Some campaigns, like, they would have never given that description of how fights go on if there weren't people that were not running 6 to 8 encounters in a day. Yeah. I thought I should just bring this up for people that don't already know. I feel like this is an overtalked comment. I just want to go through every class and explain what's happening in each class so that you can have a visual representation of what's going on. I think I'm out of things to talk about here. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.